When you think about businesses that are selling through the roof, like Skims or Allbirds, sure, you think about a great product, a cool brand, and great marketing. But an often overlooked secret is actually the businesses behind the business, making selling and for shoppers buying simple. For millions of businesses, that business is Shopify. It's home of Shop Pay, the #1 checkout in the world. You can use it to boost conversions up to 50%, meaning way less carts going abandoned and way more sales going through to checkout. Upgrade your business and get the same checkout Allbirds uses. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/income, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/income to upgrade your selling today. Shopify.com/income.
This episode is brought to you by Indeed. We're driven by the search for better, but when it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate isn't to search at all. Don't search, match with Indeed. Use Indeed for scheduling, screening, and messaging so you can connect with candidates faster. Listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/MBO. Terms and conditions apply.
Hey friends, I'm Rachel Grohl, and I'm your host for the Hearing Jesus podcast, where I help you to know God and to make Him known. Today, we're continuing our study of Mark chapter 14, and this is a pretty heavy chapter. If you're just joining us, welcome to the show. We are working our way through the Gospel of Mark, and as I've taught in this series over the last couple of weeks, the Gospel of Mark is actually the words and the actions of the Apostle Peter. So you want to keep that in mind as we're reading. And this section, what we're going to study today, is pretty heavy. It is the tail end of the gospel. We have just a couple chapters left, and we're talking about the scene that opens up in the Garden of Gethsemane. And so I'm not going to read the entire portion. Instead, I'm going to read just little bits at a time. Again, I just want to remind you, if you want to dive a little bit deeper, we do have extra resources linked at the show notes. We have our Patreon page, which on Patreon for just $5 a month, it gets you the ad-free episodes. It gets you the guided journaling prompts, and then it also gives you an opportunity to look at the discussion questions that go along with the kids episodes, because the kids episodes talk about the same content, just taught in a way that kids can understand. Again, all of that is found at the link in our show notes. And so I want to read, I'm just going to do verses 32 through 36. So again, this is Mark 14, 32 through 36. They went to a place called Gethsemane, and Jesus said to his disciples, "Sit here while I pray." He took Peter, James, and John along with him, and he began to be deeply distressed and troubled. "My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death," he said to them. "Stay here and keep watch." Going a little farther, he fell to the ground and prayed that if possible, the hour might pass from him. "Abba, Father," he said, "everything is possible for you. Take this cup from me, yet not what I will, but you will." So this scene opens up in the Garden of Gethsemane, and I didn't know this until not too long ago, but that word Gethsemane, it actually means oil press. They're in a garden surrounded by olive trees, and the Gethsemane is the actual device, that stone device that they use to press the oil out. I think that actually sets the tone for what's about to happen in the life of Jesus. Remember, he's getting ready to go to the cross. And so what we witness in this scene is one of the most profound moments of the life of Jesus. It is a moment of vulnerability. It is a moment that reminds us of how human he is. He's separated from most of his disciples. He only brings with him Peter, James, and John. And this is a group who's witnessed some of the most intimate and powerful moments of the ministry of Jesus, including the Transfiguration. Remember, we just talked about the Transfiguration. It was just these three that were there. But this time, instead of it being a moment of glory and celebration and excitement, they're witnessing the complete opposite. This is his darkest hour. The sorrow that Jesus is carrying in this scene is palpable. Mark uses the Greek word ekthembeo, which I know how to read the Greek. I don't know how to pronounce the Greek, so if that's wrong, please feel free to correct me. But that word suggests the most intense kind of horror or dread. So that word is a showcase And it's a pointing forward to what we're going to be experiencing, what Jesus is going to be experiencing in the coming passages. It's intense. And then what we see is Jesus falls to the ground and he's praying from a place of anguish. I don't know if you've ever been in a place of prayer like that. I think from the human experience, there are some moments where we have those kinds of deep prayers, but we know that Jesus knows that he's headed to death. And so he's calling out to God, and he calls God Abba, which is a very intimate form of saying something like daddy. It's a way to call God Father, but it's this close, intimate kind of reference to him as daddy. And you can just sense this childlike aspect to the relationship that Jesus has with God the Father. And it describes kind of a unique way that he has this relationship with God, because remember, nobody else did at the time. This is what Jesus was doing, was he was making a way for humankind to have that kind of Abba relationship with God the Father. And he also shows us in this passage how much he trusts God. He says this prayer, "Take this cup from me." And really what that does is it reveals that there's this genuine struggle, because yes, Jesus was fully God, but he was also fully human. He understood the human emotion of agony that was waiting for him. And so Jesus, of course, is entirely willing to obey God's will. But this is this moment of vulnerability where we're seeing this inside sense of how much he's dreading, knowing what's coming ahead of him. It's his humanity that is grappling with the suffering that's coming up. Jesus also mentions the cup, and the cup is talking about a couple things. Of course, it's talking about his impending death. But in biblical terms, the cup often symbolizes the judgment of God or the wrath of God. So here, what it's likely representing is the full weight of human sin and suffering that he's going to bear when he goes to the cross. And so, nevertheless, despite the fact that he is struggling with this intense desire to avoid this kind of suffering, Jesus submits and he says, okay, it's not what I will, it's what you will. And his choice to really surrender and embrace God's plan without any kind of angelic support or any kind of assurance in this moment. We don't necessarily know what was going on in his head and his heart, what God was saying to him, but there's nothing outwardly that shows us that there's this extra assurance. And so that is just this opportunity for us to recognize how much Jesus obeyed God, even in those moments that he knew suffering was coming. The next section is verses 37 through 42, where, up until now, we're seeing Jesus' experience. Now we're going to see what the disciples' experience was. So verse 37, it says, "Then he returned to his disciples and found them sleeping. 'Simon,' he said to Peter, 'are you asleep? Couldn't you keep watch for 1 hour? Watch and pray that you will not fall into temptation. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak.' Once more he went away and prayed the same thing. When he came back, he found again them sleeping, because their eyes were heavy. They did not know what to say to him. Returning the third time, he said to them, 'Are you still sleeping and resting? Enough, the hour has come. Look, the Son of Man is delivered into the hands of sinners. Rise, let us go. Here comes my betrayer.'" So while Jesus was experiencing this anguish in this Garden of Gethsemane, the disciples were struggling to even stay awake. And initially, Jesus instructs them to stay here and keep watch. And there's this implication here that it's not just staying alert, but it's this call to be vigilant spiritually, to spiritually hold the defense, to cover him in prayer. And the disciples, probably well-meaning and well-intentioned, they're human and they get tired and they fall asleep. They don't just fall asleep once, they fall asleep repeatedly. And so that failure is this foreshadowing of what's to come, because remember, we know the end of the story, but what's coming is they're going to abandon him. And that speaks to this larger spiritual truth that the human tendency is to falter, especially in moments that require a lot of spiritual resolve. As a missionary, one of the things that I would always do when I was getting ready to go in country is I would ask people to pray. And I would ask people to pray to cover me for that time that I was going to be in country. But I learned pretty quickly that I needed to assign several people to pray. And I actually would assign several people per day because number one, if they fell asleep on Jesus, they're going to fall asleep on me. And number two, it can never hurt to have more prayer. But there's been times where I would send a message to somebody that was supposed to be praying that day, and they would have completely forgot about it. And so thankfully, I have a lot of really good prayer support now. But in those early days, I often would just feel abandoned spiritually. And if I felt that way, how much more did Jesus feel that way? We can just see some of the humanity coming out in him here. We can sense his frustration because he says, couldn't you have kept watch for just 1 hour? And we just hear that in his voice. And this question, it points back to this lack of awareness on the part of the disciples because I still don't think that they get the gravity of the moment. They still don't seem to 100% fully comprehend the depth of what is going on. And they fall prey to what Jesus himself describes as weakness of the flesh. And so they might have good intentions. I think all of us start out with good intentions, but they lack the strength or the spiritual fortitude, so to speak, to stay vigilant under the pressure, even the pressure of their humanness, of their human body. And so after the third time that Jesus finds them asleep, he declares, "Enough. The hour has come." The inability of the disciples to stay awake during the time of need that Jesus has, it's painful to think through that, but it underscores this contrast between the spiritual readiness of Jesus and the human frailty of the disciples. Jesus, at this point, even in his humanness, has prepared himself for the coming trial. He's been in prayer. He's been preparing spiritually, emotionally. The disciples still, they're not fully aware of what's going on. They're unprepared. And it reveals this vulnerability that they have to fear and failure. I think fear and failure are two of the vulnerabilities that we experience, sometimes no matter how well-intentioned we are. Hey friends, are you loving the deep conversations, the biblical insight, and the spiritual growth content that I share on the Hearing Jesus podcast? Well, I've got some fantastic news for you. Starting at just $5 a month, you can become a member of our Patreon community and take your Hearing Jesus experience to a whole new level. When you join Patreon, you gain access to ad-free episodes, daily journaling prompts and worksheets, monthly bonus content, personalized Q&A sessions with me, giveaways, and more. As a Patreon supporter, you're not just a listener, you're a valued member of my inner circle. But that's not all. Our Patreon community is a place where you can connect with like-minded people who share your passion for spiritual growth, engage in meaningful discussions, share your thoughts, and be part of something that's truly special. Plus, we've got some awesome perks lined up for our Patreon supporters, from shout-outs on the podcast to exclusive merch and more. So if you're ready to dive deeper into the journey of hearing Jesus, head on over to patreon.com/Hearing Jesus. Your support makes a real difference, allowing us to continue bringing you inspiring content week after week. Also, a portion of any income from Patreon goes to support children through our partnership with Compassion International. Again, head to patreon.com/Hearing Jesus. Thank you for being a vital part of the Hearing Jesus community. Together, let's learn to live out our faith in our everyday life. Hey there, friends. With holiday season just around the corner, we're all looking for ways to save time and stress less. That's where HelloFresh comes in. They deliver fresh, pre-portioned ingredients and seasonal recipes straight to your doorstep. Seriously, it's a game changer for home cooking. Whether you're craving comforting foods or trying to please picky eaters, HelloFresh has you covered with rotating menus of 50 recipes to choose from each week. No more recipe ruts. You can whip up fun, flavorful meals without hunting down specialty ingredients, and their pre-portioned ingredients means less food waste. It's perfect for teaching teens how to cook. I can't tell you how much time HelloFresh has saved me in the kitchen. I love how easy it is to customize recipes so that every meal is just how I like it. Plus, there's always something new to try. Some of my favorites, their delicious tacos and their creamy garlic pasta, always a hit at my dinner table. And guess what? You can check out HelloFresh Market for over 100 add-on items, like desserts and quick breakfasts. This month, they even have Thanksgiving items to help wow your crowd with pretty minimal effort. Now for the best part. Get 10 free meals at HelloFresh.com/free-hearing-Jesus. This offer applies across 7 boxes for new subscribers only and varies by plan. That's right, 10 free HelloFresh meals. Just go to HelloFresh.com/free-hearing-Jesus. Remember, it's America's #1 meal kit, and you don't want to miss out on this delicious offer.
This episode is brought to you by State Farm. You might say all kinds of stuff when things go wrong, but these are the words you really need to remember. Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there. They've got options to fit your unique insurance needs, meaning you can talk to your agent to choose the coverage you need, have coverage options to protect the things you value most, file a claim right on the State Farm mobile app, and even reach a real person when you need to talk to someone. Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there.
Now I'm going to go ahead and read verses 43 through 50. It says, "Just as he was speaking, Judas, one of the 12, appeared. With him was a crowd armed with swords and clubs, sent from the chief priests, the teachers of the law, and the elders. Now the betrayer had arranged a signal with them. 'The one I kiss is the man. Arrest him and lead him away under guard.' Going at once to Jesus, Judas said, 'Rabbi,' and kissed him. The men seized Jesus and arrested him. Then one of those standing near drew his sword and struck the servant of the high priest, cutting off his ear. 'Am I leading a rebellion,' said Jesus, 'that you have come out with swords and clubs to capture me? Every day I was with you, teaching in the temple courts, and you did not arrest me. But the scriptures must be fulfilled.' Then everyone deserted him and fled." So Jesus finishes speaking to the disciples, and a crowd armed with swords and clubs basically arrives to arrest him, to attack him. And they're led by one of his own followers. Judas has brought these guys to where Jesus was. This moment captures this tension and some irony, because Jesus, who has peacefully taught in the temple, has done nothing wrong, is met by armed guards as if he were a violent criminal. Jesus has never been violent. I mean, with the exception of the day that he went in and he flipped the tables on the money changers that were in violation, we've never seen anything of the sort out of Jesus, except they come with armed guards basically prepared for him to be violent. The weapons and that large crowd is symbolism of the fear and the misunderstanding that surrounded Jesus at the time. The fear of the loss of control and the loss of power that the religious leaders had. And again, it contrasts the difference between the actual mission of Jesus, which is peaceful, and then the aggressive actions of those who were in opposition to him. I think this also reveals the fact that the Jewish people, were still expecting this political rebellion out of Jesus, and that is not what he came to do. One of the followers, in a moment of reactive fear, ever been there? I know I have. Perhaps there's some misplaced loyalty there. He draws a sword and he strikes the servant of the high priest. This act of violence is met with Jesus rebuking him. And again, it's this reflection of the commitment that Jesus has to this non-violent path, even in the middle of betrayal and aggression towards him. Jesus is emphasizing that his arrest is part of the divine plan. It is part of what God had planned for the redemption of humankind, and it's fulfilling what's been foretold in Scripture. As hard as that is for us to recognize, and probably as hard as it is for the disciples to recognize, we have to see that Jesus recognizes it in that moment. He's calm, he's willing to submit, and there's this acceptance of the will of God. He knew it was coming. And so the chaotic action of what's going on around him actually contrasts with the peace that's going on inside of him. The disciples, which at one point were incredibly confident in their loyalty, what happens now? They scatter. They scatter and they abandon Jesus, and he is led away. And again, this points to this idea of human fear taking over. You know, a lot of times when we operate in fear, it takes over our thought life, our minds, our actions. And Jesus is composed. He's accepting his fate. He's let off. And it's not that he couldn't have resisted, but he knew that this was part of God's plan. I'm going to read just 51 and 52. A young man wearing nothing but a linen garment was following Jesus. When they seized him, he fled naked, leaving his garment behind. What is that about? That doesn't seem to fit at all. It is a brief account. It's kind of weird about this young guy fleeing the scene, and it kind of stands out in Mark's narrative. The young man, who was likely caught up in the chaos of the event, is seized, but he manages to escape, and he leaves behind his linen garment, meaning he's running away completely naked. This seems like a minor detail and kind of weird, but again, it's a reflection of the vulnerability of the followers of Jesus in the intensity of this moment. And so the disciples fled, running away. They abandoned their claims of loyalty. Just yesterday, we talked about the Last Supper, and they're like, no, I'm never going to disown you. Well, less than 24 hours later, just later that evening, we're seeing that they are no longer loyal. They just flee. And this young man, as he flees and he's running away naked, it symbolizes just the stripping away of human courage and human resolve. The escape of this young man, without the protection or the support of anything he at one point had, highlights this broader theme. There's this somewhat unavoidable loneliness and isolation that Jesus is getting ready to face as he moves closer to the cross. Little by little, all of the disciples have left him. And this scene, it really reminds us of the weakness and the fear of the strength of Jesus and the determination to face the fate that is coming to him. And so there's this quiet dignity that we see in Jesus, and that's contrasted with the panic and the chaos that is happening around him. The Gethsemane scene invites us to reflect on a couple things. I think there are themes of course, loyalty, vulnerability, and then divine purpose that we can really meditate on here. I think the request for Jesus to ask of his disciples to stay with him and to pray for him represents this need that Jesus had, this human need that he had for support in this moment. We can't forget that, yes, he was God, but he was also human. He had human needs. He had emotional needs. That's sometimes hard to wrap our mind around, the fact that Jesus, as a human, had emotional needs. But this is an indication of that. He needed support. And they were close to him, despite their proximity to him and their promises that they made to him, they still were unable to meet that need, and they fell asleep. I think sometimes that's an indication for us that our intentions sometimes get away from us in our humanity. There's a gap between the intention and the action a lot of times with humankind. And it's a reflection that even the disciples who were the closest to Jesus, they struggled to stay committed in times of fear and exhaustion. I think we can be really quick to judge and to jump to judging the disciples and say, if I was there, I wouldn't have left Jesus in the lurch. I would have just been loyal to the end. Well, they had thought so too. They had just claimed as much the day before. But the reality is they were human. I think that helps us to understand that there are going to be seasons of failure for us, whether it's fear or exhaustion or whatever it is, because we're human. I think there were a lot of times especially when I was in very public ministry, I would keep going and keep going and keep going to the point of exhaustion. And then eventually I'd get myself sick. And when I was sick, of course, I wasn't out serving God. And I learned that we had to find a balance. I had to really start to understand what Sabbath rest meant. And I think God understands those moments. That's why he gave us the Sabbath. But particularly in this scene, we can reflect and maybe have a little bit of grace for the disciples and the humanity that they had, that they were struggling with at the time. This passage also challenges us to consider the times that we might feel alone in our own struggles, and maybe even think about the times where we have let others down, even if it wasn't intentional. Maybe we fell asleep, or maybe we were one of those prayer partners that completely forgot to pray, or maybe even something more simple where somebody asks us to pray, we tell them that we're going to pray, and then we completely forget about it. One way to combat that, just side note, pray right there in the moment. If somebody asks you to pray for them right then and there, whether it's a text message or a voice thread or whatever you got to do in person, laying hands on them, pray for them. Don't say, yeah, you're going to pray and then forget about it. Just do it right then and there. That's what I do. It's really helped a lot. But in contrast to that, I think it's important to recognize that Jesus was unwavering in his focus on his mission, and he still is today. Even when he was going through this moment of huge personal agony, he knew it was coming, the anxiety that was coming up in him. We don't often think about Jesus having anxiety, but that's what we're seeing here, this moment of agony and anxiety for him. That's a powerful example for us. He remained committed to the purpose of God in his life, despite his sorrow, despite his anxiety, despite his agony, despite his feelings, because he was committed to obedience. And I think that encourages us to rely on God's strength when we are facing moments of difficulty, trusting that even in the struggle, there's a purpose at work and that we can trust God with that purpose, even when we don't understand it. Now, the failure of the disciples to stay awake also urges us to examine our own vigilance in our faith. Are we actively engaging in our spiritual lives, or are we falling into this place of complacency, especially in seasons when life becomes overwhelming? See, the call of Jesus, when he says watch and pray, it reminds us of this need that we have for being spiritually alert and to be disciplined, and knowing that there are going to be moments that are challenging to us, and those often come unexpectedly. The car accident happens unexpectedly. The child gets sick unexpectedly. The bill doesn't get paid unexpectedly. It's not like we can predict it, other than the sense that we can predict something's coming, even though we don't know exactly what, because it's just a symptom of living in this fallen world, this broken world we live in. It's this call that we see here. It's a call to stay grounded in our faith, to seek God in prayer all the time, continually, and then to rely on his strength rather than our own. The truth is we cannot do it on our own. It's those moments where we have to rely on his strength to get us through. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, in moments of vulnerability and distress, we remember the example of Jesus in the garden, praying with honesty and trust and surrendering his will to your will. God, would you strengthen us to seek you first in times of sorrow and difficulty? And would you help us to trust your plan even when we don't fully understand what it is? God, help us to stay alert, to watch and to pray so that we can remain close to you. God, in the chaos of this world, help us to be well-grounded in the reality of who you are, in faith and unwavering in our commitment to you. And God, help us to understand that there's grace in those times that we mess up. But Lord, help us not to depend on our own strength, but instead help us depend on your strength. When we feel alone or overwhelmed, remind us that you are always near, that you never leave us alone. God, would you guide us through those moments, whether we're in a moment now or if there's one coming. God, help us to have courage to face whatever lies ahead, knowing that you don't leave us alone. We're never alone. And help us to walk in boldness because of that. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Greetings and God bless. This is Tyler Burns.
And this is Dr. Jamar Tisby.
And we want to invite you to check out our podcast, Pass the Mic, Dynamic Voices for a Diverse Church.
Pass the Mic has been speaking directly to the core concerns of Black Christians for over a decade.
On our show, we've got interviews from theologians, historians, actors, activists, and so much more.
Not to mention heartfelt, open dialogue on some of the heaviest issues facing the church in the United States.
Be sure to subscribe to the show on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. We'll see you there on the next Pass the Mic.
Hey, so I'm launching a new season on the podcast, The Doctor and the Nurse. World-renowned brain coach Dr. Daniel Amen joins me as a co-host as we dive deep into the mind and the brain of everything high performance. I've been fascinated for years as I've worked with top athletes, high-powered CEOs, Hollywood actors, and all high performers in all types of different fields of how they break through pressure, ignite drive, how they overcome distractions, how they put fear on the bench, how they tap into flow state and just dominate all these different areas of high performance. So on this season, my good friend Dr. Daniel Lehman will break down what is actually going on in the brain in these different areas, and I will give actionable tools to be able to use and apply in your life. So buckle up, the doctor and the nurse on the David Nurse Show coming at you.